Chapter 22-23. Just one smile, that moment of youth. Even in such a crowd, they could still see each other at a glance. Bachin slowly sat down and waved his hands slightly. The crowd of disciples then stood up straight, full of vigor and anticipation. Quite a number of disciples had noticed Bachin's smile towards Bailey Hongzhuang, and they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. The young sect master's feelings towards Bailey Hongzhuang were indeed not ordinary. Tan Lihan glared hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang, her heart feeling extremely indignant. She just couldn't stand looking at Bailey Hongzhuang. Apart from her outstanding looks and bewitching looks, everything else about this woman was just average. However, the young sect master's honorable presence was actually so affectionate towards Bailey Hongzhuang. It was really hard to imagine. In terms of looks, she felt that her looks weren't too bad either. In comparison, she had liked Xin Xiuhan for a very long time, but he had never expressed his feelings towards her. Although her power couldn't be compared to Xin Xiuhan's, it wasn't too bad. The gap between the two of them wasn't that huge, but she could always feel that Xin Xiuhan cared about her. However, the gap between Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master was simply a chasm that was difficult to cross. Even so, the young sect master had still acknowledged Bailey Hongzhuang's existence in front of everyone. The gap between the two of them was just too big. While Tan Lihan was glaring hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay any attention to Tan Lihan. However, she could still feel her gaze. It looked like Tan Lihan really hated her this time. But even so what? Since the young sect master is here, let's begin the competition between the four palaces, shall we? Qin Ai's face was filled with a warm and benevolent smile as he asked Bachin respectfully. Bachin nodded slightly and said, "Since everyone is here, let's begin." After receiving Bachin's approval, the palace masters and elders were all smiles. Bachin immediately stood up and looked at the dense crowd of disciples below the high platform. His voice was magnetic and loud. The Battle of the Four Halls has always been a tradition of the Tiangang sect. The ranking of the Battle of the Four Halls is also related to the distribution of resources in the following period of time. Presumably, everyone was paying close attention to this competition between the four palaces and had been looking forward to it for a long time. At the same time, everyone should know that this Battle of the Four Palaces will affect the Battle of Zhuolu in 3 months' time. Once one participates in the Battle of Zhuolu, as long as one performs well in the Battle of Zhuolu, one's name will truly spread throughout the world. Therefore, in this competition between the four palaces, I hope that everyone will be able to bring out their true strength. As Bachin's voice fell, the eyes of all the disciples present lit up, especially those participating in the competition. This was a crucial moment for their future. Speaking of which, the disciples who were participating in the Battle of the Four Palaces felt that they were exceptionally lucky. Coincidentally, the Battle of the Four Palaces was related to the quota for the Battle of Zhuolu. If it had been any other time, they wouldn't have had such an opportunity. I believe that everyone is ready. Then, I hereby announce that the Battle of the Four Palaces has officially begun. In a split second, the atmosphere in the entire battle arena changed. All the disciples looked at the stage with great anticipation. The exciting competition would begin here. Chapter 22-24. Under everyone's gaze, Qiaoyingzi slowly stood up. The great elder had completely disappeared from Tiangang's sect. Therefore, Qiaoyingzi, who was originally the second elder, was now the great elder of Tiangang's sect. The preliminary round uses the method of drawing lots. Disciples who draw the same number will compete with each other. The order of the competition will be determined according to this number. Number 1 is the disciple in the first round of the competition. Number 40 is the disciple in the last round of the competition. Does everyone understand? In the process of this competition, only drawing lots was the fairest method. Disciples understand. The participating disciples of the 4 major branch halls responded one after another. Now, the participating disciples can come up to the stage to draw lots. Listening to Qiaoyingzi's words, the disciples of the 4 major branch halls walked up to the high platform one after another. This drawing lots was also an opportunity for them to show their abilities. When every disciple walked up to the high platform, there would be a burst of discussion below the high platform. As the existence of the top 20 of each branch hall of Tiangang sect, they had always been known by everyone. The participating disciples were even more arrogant. They were already the existence of powerhouses to be able to obtain a place in this competition. Bailey Hongzhuang also walked up to the high platform. After drawing her lot, she walked back to her original position. When Bailey Hongzhuang walked back to the preparation position of the participating disciples, she found that everyone's position was according to the order of the competition. In this way they could also see who their next opponent was. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. Everything was really simple and clear. Bailey Hongzhuang was number 27. Her appearance was a little late, so her position was also a little further back. Her opponent was a male disciple of the Azure Dragon Hall. However, she didn't know much about the Azure Dragon Hall and didn't know how strong her opponent was. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the male disciple's gaze also fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. The moment he saw Bailey Hongzhuang, the male disciple was obviously stunned for a moment. After he reacted, he revealed a smile. Bailey Hongzhuang also responded with a smile. Tan Lihan and Xin Xiuhan's rankings were relatively high. Tan Lihan was in the 7th round, while Xin Xiuhan was in the 15th round. Coincidentally, she could also understand their strength through their competition. After drawing lots, the first round of the competition began. There was only one huge battling platform in this huge martial arts arena. The scale was extremely vast. After the referee elder introduced the names of the two disciples and the sub-palaces they came from, the competition officially began. This battle was just as Bailey Hongzhuang had expected. The strength of each disciple selected from the sub-palace was not weak. On this martial arts stage they even used all their skills. Their combat strength was very astonishing. Therefore they were in a stalemate when they exchanged blows. Both sides were in a deadlock and no one could do anything to the other for a while. However, one couldn't help but admit that the strength of these disciples was really outstanding. The collision of their martial skills and battle experience would often cause the disciples and the spectators stand to cry out in surprise. Through watching this competition, they understood the difference in strength between themselves and the disciples on the ranking board. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was watching the competition, a voice rang out beside Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 22-25. Hearing this unfamiliar voice, Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. She had never met this Yi Qinyu before. However, since the other party took the initiative to express goodwill, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't mind making another friend. Of course, the premise was that the other party didn't have any other thoughts. So it's senior brother Yi. Sorry for the disrespect. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled lightly. Junior sister Bailey doesn't spend much time in the palace. I presume you don't know much about your opponents. I've always liked to collect information, especially about the participating disciples. I have some understanding of their strength. Why don't I introduce them to junior sister Bailey? Yi Qinyu was obviously a friendly person. After seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang didn't reject him, he immediately began to introduce. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She indeed didn't know anything about the participating disciples. This was a bit disadvantageous. If someone could introduce her, she would naturally be very happy. Then I'll have to trouble senior brother Yi. Your opponent is Lu Xingyang of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. I can say that junior sister Bailey's luck is very good. Yi Qinyu smiled lightly. He believed that there were many people who were envious of Bailey Hongzhuang's good luck. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. She had more or less understood Yi Qinyu's meaning. This Lu Xingyang is at the bottom of the participating disciples of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. If there are no accidents, he will definitely be eliminated in the first round. He is 21 this year and has been in the Tiangang sect for 2 years. His current cultivation is between Green Realm level 9 and Green Realm level 1. As far as I know, he was still Green Realm level 9 before. However, I feel that in order to have a good performance in the competition between the 4 palaces, he must have tried his best to break through to Green Realm level 1. The last 40 disciples participating in the competition between the 4 palaces have about the same cultivation. However, everyone's fighting strength is different. However, the first place of the 4 palaces is much stronger. Yi Qinyu earnestly explained the situation to Bailey Hongzhuang. The participating disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall didn't know of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, but he did. This was because when Bailey Hongzhuang was taking the test yesterday, he was also in the stone room and personally saw Bailey Hongzhuang's heaven stage. Even in the entire Tiangang sect, how many disciples of this level could appear? Therefore he knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was not weak. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang stood on the martial arts stage and began to compete, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples would probably be stunned. He had already admired Bailey Hongzhuang very much during the alchemist competition. In addition, Bailey Hongzhuang was a cultivator who had been evaluated as a heaven stage cultivator, which made him admire her even more. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang was very amiable and approachable. He was very happy to have the opportunity to be friends with Bailey Hongzhuang. After Bailey Hongzhuang understood LV Xingyang's strength, she understood in her heart. She didn't expect that her luck in randomly drawing lots would be so good. This way she could still hide a certain amount of her strength in the first round of the preliminary competition. I didn't expect senior brother Yi to understand the situation of these disciples so well. I really admire you. Originally, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay much attention to Yi Qinyu's words. After all, as long as one stayed in Tiangang sect long enough, it was normal to have some understanding of some disciples. Chapter 22-26. Junior sister Bailey is too polite. With junior sister's ability, it's easy for you to obtain this information. It's just that junior sister is busy and doesn't know much about it. In fact, most of the disciples participating today have some understanding of their opponents. In this way we can reduce the possibility of being at a disadvantage when we fight. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. She knew that Yi Qinyu was telling the truth. The Battle of the Four Palaces this time was related to many things. Every disciple was thinking of ways to make full preparations. It wasn't difficult to obtain information. As long as they walked around a few palaces and spent some resources to inquire, they would definitely be able to obtain the information they wanted. However, none of the disciples were fools. Thus they would hide some of their strength. However, the gap wouldn't be too big. Bailey Hongzhuang had previously spent all her time on raising her cultivation and didn't have the time to pay attention to these things. She never thought that Yi Qinyu would tell her about these things. Senior brother Ye's information is very helpful to me. However, I still want to know some information from senior brother. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said. Yi Qinyu smiled. Junior sister Bailey, if you have any questions just tell me. I will tell you everything I know. To him, most of this information was known to everyone. If he could make Bailey Hongzhuang think highly of him, he would be extremely happy. Of course, the information he gathered was more specific than what the ordinary disciples gathered. I wonder if senior brother Yi can introduce me to the strongest of the four palaces? Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Yi Qinyu. She didn't pay much attention to the strength of the ordinary disciples. However, the strongest of the four palaces were definitely extremely powerful. Once they entered the finals, they would definitely encounter each other. She had to understand more. Originally, she planned to wait until the end of today's competition to find out more. However, since there was Yi Qinyu who was extremely knowledgeable, she naturally wouldn't go too far. This is naturally not a problem. Yi Qinyu smiled. The strongest of the Azure Dragon Hall is called Xiao Feilin. He's 23 years old and has been famous in the Azure Dragon Hall for a long time. When he first entered the Tiangang sect, he was already very powerful and deeply praised by the Azure Dragon Hall master. Under the nurturing of the Tiangang sect's resources, his potential completely exploded, and the speed at which his strength increased was extremely shocking. For the past year, he had been in seclusion and could be called a cultivation maniac. He had never fought with anyone, so it was difficult to judge his strength. However, it is said that before he went into seclusion, his cultivation had already reached Green Realm level 9. At the mention of Xiao Feilin, Yi Qinyu couldn't help but sigh. The strength of such an expert was simply too shocking. Even if the cultivators behind him tried their best to catch up, they were still too far away. Bailey Hongzhuang secretly exclaimed in her heart. Sure enough, the first rankers of this branch hall were all extremely terrifying existences. Their talent and strength were both astonishing. The strongest person in the White Tiger Hall is called Xiao Feiyu. She and the Azure Dragon Hall's Xiao Feilin are blood siblings. Both of their talents are extremely shocking. However, these two people had always regarded each other as opponents and wanted to defeat each other. Therefore, when they first entered Tiangang sect, they chose different branches. Chapter 22-27. After learning that Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were actually a pair of siblings, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. The genes of this pair of siblings were truly amazing. Our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 expert is Shen Xiuhan. He's 24 years old and very few people are able to communicate with him. Shen Xiuhan can be said to be the most difficult person to approach among the experts of the four palaces, but his strength is also admirable. In this year, Shen Xiuhan is the same as Xiao Feilin, always in a state of seclusion and rarely appears in front of everyone. It could be assumed that the experts of the four palaces had already known about the Battle of Zhuolu. Therefore, they had put all their efforts into improving their cultivation in order to perform well in the Battle of the Four Palaces. The strength of the experts of the four palaces is not too different, so the ranking has always been controversial and has never been confirmed. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Shen Xiuhan indifferently. Although Shin Xiuhan was arrogant and disdainful, she had to admit that he did have his own abilities. The number one expert of the Black Martial Hall is Yan Bin. Like his name, he is straightforward and can be said to have a violent temper. Moreover, Yan Bin is famous for being a battle maniac. As long as there is a disagreement, he will start a fight. Thinking back, the Black Martial Hall master also felt very helpless towards Yan Bin, but because Yan Bin is indeed a cultivation genius and has now become the number one expert of the Black Martial Hall, the previous problems naturally disappeared. Under Yi Qinyu's reminder, Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the appearances of the four great experts. Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were indeed brother and sister. Their appearances were very similar, but after looking at them for a while, she felt that Xiao Feilin was more feminine and Xiao Feiyu was more masculine. As expected, the extremely similar faces were of completely different genders. After looking at them for a long time, it was quite magical. Needless to say, Shin Xiuhan was cold and arrogant, looking down from above, with a bit of the demeanor of an expert. Yan Bin was like his name. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not someone to be trifled with. However, his appearance was very outstanding, just like a sunny and handsome man. However, any disciple who had some understanding of Yan Bin knew that all this was just on the surface. If anyone provoked him, it would be really troublesome. Even Shin Xiuhan and the others were not willing to have any conflicts with Yan Bin. When the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Yi Qinyu had taken the initiative to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were somewhat astonished. Yi Qinyu's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was also not bad. His strength was also very high. Furthermore, Yi Qinyu had another ability, which was that he was extremely good at gathering information. In fact, although everyone was very unhappy that Bailey Hongzhuang had obtained this quota through the back door, there were still many disciples who wanted to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang because of her identity. Therefore, when Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang clashed, no one helped Tan Lihan. However, no one expected that Yi Qinyu would take the initiative to befriend Bailey Hongzhuang. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang also recognized Yi Qinyu as a friend. Yi Qinyu's actions were really fast. When Shin Xiuhan saw that Yi Qinyu and Bailey Hongzhuang were chatting happily, he could not help but furrow his brows. However, he quickly returned to his usual appearance. In the process of this conversation, the competition continued. Chapter 22-28. As long as the disciples ranked in the bottom 40 became their opponents, the competition would take a little more time. However, the higher the ranking of the disciples, the less time they spent in the battle. It was almost as if the battle ended in a single exchange. Just from this point, it could be seen how big the difference in strength between the first and the 20th disciple was. Bailey Hongzhuang faintly sighed. The huge Tiangang sect was really full of talents. Wanting to enter the finals was not an easy task. As for ranking in the front, that was even more difficult. If she had not been in closed-door cultivation for the past 3 months, it would have been impossible for her to obtain a place in the Battle of Zhuolu. Very quickly, the first disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall went up. Bailey Hongzhuang saw that this figure was very familiar because this person was the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gui Jianyuan. Thinking back to the first time she went to the arena, Gui Jianyuan told Bailey Hongzhuang a lot of information about the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's cultivation. However, she rarely appeared after that and naturally did not have the chance to see Gui Jianyuan again. Bailey Hongzhuang had a very good impression of the approachable Gui Jianyuan. Previously, Gui Jianyuan had been standing very close to the front, so Bailey Hongzhuang did not notice him. Now that she saw Gui Jianyuan go up the stage, she finally noticed. As expected, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gui Jianyuan's strength was extremely powerful. Although he was not the number one expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, his ranking would definitely not be bad. After Yi Qinyu saw that Bailey Hongzhuang seemed to be very interested in Gui Jianyuan, he could not help but say, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gui Jianyuan's strength is ranked second in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, second only to Shin Xiuhan. This competition will not put any pressure on Gui Jianyuan. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Her thoughts were the same as Yi Qinyu's. The moment Gui Jianyuan and his opponent exchanged blows, the gap between the two could already be seen. Winning was only a matter of time. In the following period of time, the disciples went up one by one. Time quietly passed in this process. However, the enthusiasm of the disciples around the martial arts stage did not decrease in the slightest. Especially when they saw the disciple they admired going up the martial arts stage, it was as if they had been injected with chicken blood, and they cheered endlessly. Of course, there were also many disciples who were ridiculed and belittled. Tan Lihan's strength was not bad either. She was at Green Realm level 2. No wonder she was so arrogant before. In the first preliminary round, Tan Lihan won. After the victory, Tan Lihan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang provocatively as if to say, "Look, I'm the real deal." Faced with Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang generously gave her a thumbs up. However, this thumbs up was directed downwards. Tan Lihan was so angry that she wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, on the other hand, was grinning from ear to ear. Taunting the opponent was good for venting one's emotions, and it was also good for one's cultivation. In the afternoon, after such a wait, it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to go up the stage. Round 27, Azure Dragon Palace Hall's Lu Xingyang vs Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. When the referee elder's voice rang out, the disciples present were all shocked. Compared to the top experts' battles, this battle was also highly anticipated. Chapter 22-29. LV Xingyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, and everyone knew that he was just a cannon fodder. Of course, being able to become cannon fodder in the competition of the four palaces was something that many people could not hope to achieve. However, they did not expect that LV Xingyang's opponent would be Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang was a genius. This was a fact that none of the Tiangang sect's disciples could deny. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was not a genius cultivator but a genius alchemist. In the alchemist competition, no one was Bailey Hongzhuang's match. However, in the competition of the four palaces, Bailey Hongzhuang was at a disadvantage. Hence, even though LV Xingyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, everyone still thought that LV Xingyang would win. When the Azure Dragon Palace Lord Yan Kaiqing saw that LV Xingyang's opponent was actually Bailey Hongzhuang, his expression became a little more interesting. Although LV Xingyang had defeated Bailey Hongzhuang, the competition of the four palaces was just like that. Even though it was only the first round of the preliminary round, whichever palace had the most disciples left would be a kind of glory. Qin Ai saw through Yan Kaiqing's thoughts at one glance and could not help but laugh secretly. Bailey Hongzhuang's power was not as simple as everyone thought. He also wanted to know what Yan Kaiqing's expression would be when Bailey Hongzhuang defeated LV Xingyang later on. Thinking of this, Qin Ai felt very happy. When Yan Kaiqing saw that Qin Ai was not the least bit helpless and instead looked very happy, his thoughts changed a little. Could it be that there was a trap in this matter? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Yan Kaiqing felt that it was impossible. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang was a new disciple of the Tiangang sect. Participating in the competition of the four palaces was originally a very disadvantageous matter. Among the disciples participating in the competition of the four palaces, other than Bailey Hongzhuang, no one else was a new disciple. Basically, in every battle of the four palaces, the new disciples did not have a chance, but Bailey Hongzhuang was an exception. The other disciples are disciples who have cultivated in Tiangang sect for more than 2 years. Their age and strength are stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, even if Bailey Hongzhuang had failed in the battle of the four palaces, it would be a very normal thing. Lu Xingyang, your luck is not bad today. You actually drew junior sister Bailey. You will definitely advance to the second round of the preliminaries. The disciples of the Azure Dragon Hall looked at LV Xingyang with envy. This kind of luck was really enviable. That may not be the case. Junior sister Bailey was able to participate in the competition of the four palaces, which proves that she is very strong. Chapter 22-30. Under the high platform, Xia Jiqing and the others saw that it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to fight, and they couldn't help but be excited. After waiting for so long, Hongzhuang is finally going to fight, haha. We haven't seen Hongzhuang fight for a long time. I don't know what realm Hongzhuang's strength has reached now. Xia Jiqing's face was full of curiosity. In the past, when she cultivated with Hongzhuang every day, watching Hongzhuang's strength increase speed, she only felt that she couldn't catch up. Since entering Tiangang sect, they hadn't seen Bailey Hongzhuang fight again, so they didn't know what realm Bailey Hongzhuang had reached now. Hongzhuang's cultivation talent is very amazing, but the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples have a much longer cultivation time than Hongzhuang. Overall, Hongzhuang is still at a disadvantage. Gong Shaoqing calmly analyzed the situation in front of him. From the previous battle, it could be seen how strong the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples were. No wonder the new disciples were directly sentenced to death. In the face of such strength, they simply had no chance of winning. Indeed, the disciples of Tiangang sect have no bad talent, so the longer the cultivation time, the more advantage the disciples have. Therefore, among the disciples only Hong Zhuang is the youngest. Dong Fangyu was also somewhat helpless. This was completely an unfair battle for the new disciples. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to get the opportunity to participate, which was already very good. Lu Qinghua stared at Bailey Hongzhuang on the high platform. She had a faint feeling that the current Bailey Hongzhuang had completely left them behind. On the martial arts stage, Bailey Hongzhuang and LV Xingyang stood opposite each other, both of their faces showing a polite smile. The competition begins. After the referee elder saw that both of them were ready, he immediately began the competition. Junior sister Bailey, sorry for the offense. LV Xingyang first bowed to Bailey Hongzhuang. No matter what the final result of this competition was, he hoped that it would not cause a rift between them. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw that LV Xingyang's attitude was extremely calm, she also bowed and said, "Senior brother, do your best." In the next moment, Lu Xingyang's Green Realm Level 1 aura gushed out of his body like a bolt of lightning. After sensing LV Xingyang's aura, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. Yi Qinyu's judgment was really accurate. Judging from LV Xingyang's aura, he had just broken through to Green Realm Rank 1. "Master, leave this competition to me," Baisher said excitedly. His gaze was completely locked onto Lu Xingyang. This was only the first round of the preliminaries. There was no need for its master to make a move. It would be able to deal with it on its own. As their masters contracted beasts, they were a part of their master's strength. Even on this stage, contracted beasts were allowed to fight. Before this, there were many battles where contracted beasts fought. Contracted beasts could increase a cultivator's strength. Moreover, they were completely trustworthy. Therefore, as long as a cultivator had the conditions to have a contracted beast, they would not be stingy with their wealth to exchange for a suitable contracted beast. In this competition between the four palaces, many disciples had their own contracted beasts. Moreover, they were very powerful. Chapter 2231. Bailey Hongzhuang was not in a hurry to let Baisher fight. However, after seeing how confident and eager Baisher was, she felt that it was a good choice to let Baisher fight. Baisher's current strength was no longer the same as before. Ever since it consumed a large number of blood-colored demon crystals in the desert world, its improvement could be said to be very shocking. Xiao He and Xiao Bai were envious after seeing Baisher's improvement speed. However, they could not increase their strength by consuming demon crystals and could only stare in envy. As the only beast king in the world, Baisher was born with talents and abilities that many other demonic beasts did not have. "Alright, then you will fight in this match." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Usually, everyone didn't pay much attention to her three contracted beasts, but today in front of everyone's eyes she wanted to let these disciples know that her three contracted beasts weren't incompetent. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang slowly took a few steps back under everyone's astonished gaze. Then Baisher directly stood in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and confronted LV Xingyang. Seeing Baisher's actions, LV Xingyang could not help but be stunned for a moment. He thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would very likely let her contracted beasts fight together. However, even if other disciples fought together with their contracted beasts, it would be a cultivator and a contracted beast working together. However, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's situation, it seemed that she intended to let this contracted beast fight with him and did not intend to participate. Baisher's figure had grown a lot. Compared to when it first came to Tiangang sect with Bailey Hongzhuang, it was now majestic. In fact, when Bailey Hongzhuang appeared with Baisher today, many people had already begun to pay attention to Baisher. A contracted beast's ability could be roughly judged from its size and strength. Some of the disciples present who knew about contracted beasts began to size up Baisher. They had to admit that Baisher gave off a mighty feeling at a glance and was definitely not just for show. Baisher did not hesitate to attack LV Xingyang as soon as it appeared. It wanted to finish this battle cleanly. Bang! White Lion pounced forward at lightning speed. White Lion was even taller than a cultivator and had an astonishing aura. LV Xingyang did not dare to underestimate White Lion at all. This contract beast's level was not low at all. Its strength was probably not inferior to his. Limitless soft palm. Essence energy surged out of LV Xingyang's palm, attacking the White Lion with a thunderous momentum. White Lion's reaction speed was extremely fast. He flipped in midair and dodged Lu Xingyang's attack. At the same time he attacked from another angle. The White Lion's speed was extremely shocking. LV Xingyang did not dare to be negligent as he quickly dodged. The moment the white lion approached, LV Xingyang felt a huge force attacking him. If he was knocked down by the white lion, his body would definitely be injured. Bang bang bang. LV Xingyang constantly attacked White Lion while White Lion dodged and attacked. Ever since he had trained in the desert world for so long, White Lion, who was already good at speed, was now even faster. His dodging ability was also top-notch. In terms of combat experience, he definitely did not lose to any cultivator. In an instant, LV Xingyang and White Lion rapidly moved around the stage. The scope of the battle shocked everyone. Bang. Chapter 2232. LV Xingyang's body fell heavily to the ground. White Lion pounced on LV Xingyang's body. Its huge mouth and sharp teeth were clearly visible. LV Xingyang felt cold sweat on his forehead. However, in the next second, White Lion had already retreated a few steps. It clearly had no intention of hurting LV Xingyang. LV Xingyang hurriedly stood up and looked at White Lion with lingering fear. White Lion's combat power was truly terrifying. If he had not judged wrongly, White Lion's cultivation level was above his. His contracted beast's cultivation level was above his. Even among the contracted beasts in the entire Tiangang sect, there were not many who could compare to White Lion. Junior sister Bailey, I've lost. LV Xingyang's attitude was calm as he bowed. From the moment he understood White Lion's abilities, he knew that he would lose this match without a doubt. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang had yet to make a move. Once Bailey Hongzhuang made a move, the result would be obvious. You let me win. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang wins. The referee elder immediately announced the result. The onlookers were all dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Bailey Hongzhuang's victory was just too easy. From the beginning to the end, Bailey Hongzhuang had not made a move at all. She had relied on her contracted beast to crush LV Xingyang. I was wondering why Bailey Hongzhuang was able to participate in this battle of the four palaces. So she relied on her contracted beast. This contracted beast's abilities are truly domineering. LV Xingyang's cultivation level has already reached Green Realm first level. Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast is even more powerful. If I had such a contracted beast, how domineering would that be? Everyone's envious eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Such a result was really unexpected. Brother Gong, is Hongzhuang's contracted beast the one I saw in the academy? Lu Qinyue's face was filled with astonishment. This gap was a bit too big. Gong Shaoqing nodded. It's the same one from back then. However, during this period of time, White Lion's transformation has become even more shocking. Even one of Boss contracted beasts is so powerful. It's practically a one-sided beating. Yuan Jixing couldn't help but sigh. When the Azure Dragon Hall Master Yan Kaiqing saw this result, his face instantly stiffened. He had never expected that Bailey Hongzhuang would have such a trump card. He had never discovered it before. Hall Master Qin, you must have known this long ago, which is why you've always been so confident, right? Yan Kaiqing probed. Qin AI smiled faintly, revealing an unfathomable expression. Then he fell silent. However, Qin AI's heart was filled with astonishment. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would be so powerful. This was a huge surprise for him. Moreover, in this way, everyone would think that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't strong and relied on her contracted beasts. It was a good way to hide Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to enter the finals? Thinking of this possibility, Qin AI couldn't help but feel excited. If a new disciple entered the finals of the Battle of the Four Palaces, it would be the first in Tiangang sect's history. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked back to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Everyone's gaze was focused on White Lion, wanting to know what kind of beast it was. Chapter 2233. Even though everyone was extremely curious about White Lion's breed, no one was able to determine what kind of breed White Lion was. Most of the breeds of contract beasts were known to everyone, but it was their first time seeing White Lion's breed. The reason why no one was able to determine White Lion's breed was because Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead. Otherwise, they would definitely be able to determine the Beast King's identity. Back then, Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead when she had just found out about its identity. Now she was even more used to it. Otherwise, once everyone knew that White Lion was a Beast King, it would definitely cause an even bigger commotion. Junior sister Bailey, congratulations. I didn't expect your contract beast to be so powerful. Yi Chenyu looked at White Lion in amazement. Before this, no one had expected White Lion to be so powerful. In this way, Bailey Hongzhuang's trump card was very shocking. Once Bailey Hongzhuang and White Lion's strength were combined, many disciples would not be a match for Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "Senior brother Yi, you flatter me." Throughout the entire day, the competition continued without stopping. Every disciple who won had a face full of joy, while the disciples who lost were extremely sad. Once they lost, they would not have any more chances. In this process, the 40 rounds of competition finally ended before the sky turned dark. Qiao Yingzi announced the names of the disciples who had advanced to the second round of preliminaries. Tomorrow would be the stage for these 40 disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang could be said to be a spectator for the entire day. She only left with everyone after the competition ended. Bailey Hongzhuang, you're just relying on your contract beast. Although this contract beast strength is not bad, it's impossible for you to reach the finals with just this contract beast. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was on her way out, Tan Lihan passed by Bailey Hongzhuang and said some harsh words unhappily. Instead of worrying about whether I can persevere, you should worry about yourself. Bailey Hongzhuang sneered. Tan Lihan snorted coldly and left. Xia Jiqing and the others came to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. After seeing Tan Lihan leave angrily, everyone was confused. Hongzhuang, what did that woman say? Xia Jiqing frowned. Today they were all on the viewing platform and were quite a distance away from Bailey Hongzhuang, so they had no idea what had happened. Bailey Hongzhuang waved her hand. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude, Xia Jiqing and the others had already understood in their hearts. However, with the identity and ability of Bailey Hongzhuang, there was indeed nothing to worry about. White Lion, I haven't seen you in a while. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Xia Jiqing touched Baisher's head. Baisher was really majestic now, and his fighting strength was really terrifying. In comparison, there was a huge gap between her Xiaofeng and him. Baisher rubbed his head against Xia Jiqing. He was still very familiar with Xia Jiqing, who had watched him grow up. Your Wind Spirit Tiger's strength has also increased very quickly. Chapter 2234. The next day the sky was clear and the wind was cool. The martial arts field was bustling with activity early in the morning. Many disciples had started betting on who would win. The odds were adjusted according to the disciple's strength. If the disciple was strong, the odds would be low. If the disciple was weak, the odds would be much higher. However, for the strongest disciples of the 4 branch palaces, this bet was not set up. This was because there was no suspense in their victory. Unless 2 of the strongest disciples of the 2 branch palaces clashed, there would be a different bet. Bailey Hongzhuang had checked her odds before the competition. She did not expect her odds to be in the middle. It seemed that everyone was optimistic about Baisher's strength. Just like the first day, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the number she had drawn. Number 3. I didn't expect to appear so early this time. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. This was good. After the competition ended, she could return to her sleeping quarters to rest. It seemed like only one day's time, but her strength would increase again. Yi Chenyu was still sitting beside Bailey Hongzhuang. After yesterday's competition, Bailey Hongzhuang already knew that Yi Chenyu was very strong. If she guessed correctly, Yi Chenyu would most likely enter the finals. Junior sister Bailey, your opponent today is White Tiger Palace's Guo Qiaoyan. Her strength belongs to the middle level of White Tiger Palace. Her cultivation is around the 2nd level of Green Realm. She has more battle experience than LV Xingyang. She is not easy to deal with, Yi Chenyu explained to Bailey Hongzhuang after seeing the number in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand. Compared to yesterday's preliminary round, it was harder to rely on luck in the 2nd round. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Green Realm Level 2. This cultivation was already very strong. The further one cultivated, the greater the difference between each level. Thank you for the reminder, senior brother Yi. I will be careful. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. The 3rd match, White Tiger Hall's Guo Qiaoyan vs Vermilion Bird Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly walked up to the high platform as soon as the referee finished speaking. At the same time, Guo Qiaoyan was already standing in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. The 2 women standing opposite each other immediately attracted the interested gazes of many disciples. Among the disciples who were participating in the finals, there were very few female disciples. The collision between these 2 female disciples was even rarer. Begin, said the judge without hesitation. Then he left the fighting ring. Guo Qiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. The elemental energy of a level 2 Green Realm warrior burst out in an instant, filling the entire sky with a sense of suppression. Guo Qiaoyan is already at Green Realm level 2. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast comes out, I'm afraid it won't be easy to win. The martial skills mastered by cultivators are much stronger than those of monsters. Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose this match. I also bet that Bailey Hongzhuang will win. I didn't expect her opponent to be Guo Qiaoyan. Some of the cultivators who had bet on Bailey Hongzhuang began to complain. This bet was all about cultivation resources. If they lost, it would not be an ordinary loss. In contrast, Xia Jiqing and the others who bet on Bailey Hongzhuang were not worried at all. Chapter 2235. The large fist enlarged in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang was not flustered as she raised her right fist to meet the attack. When the crowd saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had not allowed Baisher to make a move and had instead met Guo Qiaoyan's fist head-on, their eyes simultaneously filled with shock. Guo Qiaoyan's power had always been on the list in the White Tiger Palace. Bailey Hongzhuang was only a pill master. Was she not asking for trouble by doing this? When Guo Qiaoyan saw Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, a smile appeared in her eyes. She had thought that she would need to spend some time to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast. She never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would have no intention of letting her contracted beast attack and instead wanted to meet force with force. In this way the competition would end very quickly. Bang! The two fists collided with a loud bang and energy ripples spread outwards. However, contrary to the crowd's expectations of Bailey Hongzhuang being defeated, Bailey Hongzhuang remained standing on the same spot. Her expression was calm and she did not look injured at all. Guo Qiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang in shock. Based on the power that had been transmitted from her fist, Bailey Hongzhuang was not the least bit inferior to her. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was also a powerful cultivator? When this thought appeared in Guo Qiaoyan's mind, she felt that it was rather inconceivable. How could Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation not be any weaker than hers? Even if Bailey Hongzhuang was not a pill master, she was still a new disciple. Bailey Hongzhuang did not give Guo Qiaoyan the chance to think. She rose to her feet once again and her sharp fists exploded towards Guo Qiaoyan like lightning. Bang bang bang. The two figures flew through the air and the wind from their fists was like thunder. In a short moment they had exchanged more than 10 blows. When the two separated once again, Guo Qiaoyan's expression had turned extremely ugly. Her hands couldn't help but tremble. At this moment she no longer doubted Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. This was because not only was Bailey Hongzhuang not weaker than her, she was even stronger. I didn't expect. I underestimated you. Guo Qiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. She had never treated Bailey Hongzhuang as her opponent. Now, it seemed that she had underestimated her opponent. It's good that you don't underestimate him now. After Bailey Hongzhuang moved her muscles and bones, she felt a lot more comfortable. The demonic beasts in the desert world were all abnormally strong. In the process of cultivating in the desert world, her strength could be said to have increased rapidly. She had to fight with those monstrous demonic beasts almost every day. She hadn't fought for the past 2 days, so she wasn't used to it. The onlookers were completely dumbfounded when they saw that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was actually on par with Guo Qiaoyan's. Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang an alchemist? Why is she so strong as well? A new disciple who has already reached level 2 of the Green Realm. We can disembowel ourselves at any moment. It's a slap in the face. How would we have any dignity left? Since you're not weak, then I won't hold back. Guo Qiaoyan's voice was cold. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's strength had exceeded her expectations, she still didn't think that Bailey Hongzhuang would be a match for her. Please? Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was calm. Even at this moment she still looked as calm as ever. Ding. Chapter 2236. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her hand, and the glass sword immediately appeared in her hand. Azure Spirit Sword Technique. Guo Qiaoyan shouted coldly. The essence energy in her body instantly surged into the sharp sword in her hand, and a resplendent light emerged from the sword. Mystic Glass Sword. Bailey Hongzhuang's movements were not slow at all. She flipped her hands and condensed a seal, while the glass sword stood upright in the air. At this moment, everyone only felt that the essence energy in the air was frantically rioting. 2 terrifying auras swept out with the two as the center. In the air, 2 enormous swords quietly condensed, mixed with a frightening fluctuation. Bang! Monstrous elemental energy surged. Two sharp swords that were over 30 meters long tore through the sky with extreme violence. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, they collided with a loud bang. At the moment of impact, a thunderous sound resounded through the sky, and an extremely violent energy swept out. Fortunately, the Tiangang sect's fighting stage had its own array. No matter how shocking the battle fluctuations on the fighting stage were, it would not affect the disciples in the spectator stands in the slightest. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure rapidly retreated. With a wave of her sleeves, she removed all the energy in her body. Guo Qiaoyan similarly retreated to the other side of the fighting stage. Looking at the two attacks that constantly corroded each other in the air, her eyes were gloomy and complicated. Bailey Hongzhuang's strength exceeded her expectations. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's calm and composed appearance until now, she felt increasingly uneasy in her heart. Bang! Another earth-shattering bang sounded. The two attacks turned into smoke and dissipated into thin air. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the mystic glass sword's effect and could not help but sigh. The Tiangang sect's disciples were indeed very strong. She actually did not achieve much effect. Guo Qiaoyan's face had an additional trace of paleness. Unless one looked carefully, one would not notice it. As a long-established expert of the White Tiger Hall, she actually fell into a disadvantage in the hands of a new disciple today. This was something that Guo Qiaoyan felt was simply impossible. If they were defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang's hands, they would really lose face. I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be so capable. Maybe I won't lose the bet and will even make a fortune. Bailey Hongzhuang really hid her strength well. Yesterday, when I asked the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples, they said that Bailey Hongzhuang completely relied on the strength of her contracted beast. Now, it seems that they were just talking nonsense. I've also heard this from Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Tan Lihan. Why is she spouting such nonsense? After a short collision, many disciples had already changed their direction. At the very least, the outcome of this competition was still uncertain. In the competition area, Tan Lihan's face had already turned purple. The strength that Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed today was truly a slap to her face. However, her heart was filled with disbelief. Normally, she had never heard of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Bailey Hongzhuang's ranking on the Pillar of Fame was also abnormally poor. She did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang's schemes to be so deep. She had purposely set up a trap to make people overlook her strength. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength in addition to her contracted beast strength, her battle strength was really not weak. Why don't we end this quickly and decide the victor in one move? Guo Qiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, the pressure in her heart was incomparably great. If this continued, the only one who would be affected would be her. It looked like she had no choice but to use her trump card. Chapter 2237. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's hand seals swiftly flipped over. Vigorous yuan power whizzed out from her body and a terrifying aura quietly appeared. Guo Qiaoyan had begun her actions almost at the same time as Bailey Hongzhuang. She knew very well that it would not be easy for her to enter the finals based on her abilities. However, she felt that she still had a good chance of entering the third round of the preliminary round. As long as she entered the third round, her abilities would be acknowledged by the palace master and her future development would be smoother. After all, the top 20 in the entire Tiangang sect would be the top 5 in the branch palace. This had always been the goal that she had been striving for. When she saw that her opponent was Bailey Hongzhuang, she felt that her luck was very good and she would definitely be able to enter the third round. However, the situation before her eyes was very different from what she had imagined. If she were to be defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang, it would be better for her to be defeated by an expert who had been famous for a long time. Now, Guo Qiaoyan only felt that she had drawn the worst draw possible. Infernal Divine Palm. Guo Qiaoyan cried out loudly. The yuan power in her body whizzed wildly and almost all of it surged into the martial skill. The crowd could only feel a wave of energy in midair. Soon after, a gigantic yuan power palm slowly appeared from the clouds. A terrifying and enormous energy spread out from the infernal divine palm, causing everyone's heart to palpitate and panic. After this martial skill appeared, Guo Qiaoyan's aura withered a little, and her face was also dyed with a touch of paleness. Looking at Guo Qiaoyan's performance, the crowd understood that this was Guo Qiaoyan's trump card. Once she had unleashed it, she would not be able to unleash any more powerful moves. Instantly, the crowd's eyes lit up. It seems that once this martial skill had clashed, the result of this round would be known. Sacred Green Flame Palm. Bailey Hongzhuang cried out coldly. Soon after, a gigantic palm flickering with green flames slowly appeared in midair. The two gigantic palms faced each other in midair from a distance. Both of them were filled with an extremely violent fluctuation, causing one to tremble with fear. If that's the case, then you'll definitely lose this competition. Guqiaoyan looked at the green palm in the air. Although the two palms looked similar, she could feel that her infernal divine palm was much stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang's azure flame sacred palm. Thinking of this, Guqiaoyan couldn't help but feel relaxed. As long as she could obtain victory, so what if she had to expend a little more effort? You've finished executing your martial skill, but mine hasn't. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, her hand seal quietly changed. In the next moment, under everyone's astonished gaze, the green palm in the air rapidly shrank. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current strength, using the azure flame sacred palm was no longer as difficult as before. Instead, it was a very smooth and simple matter. As the green palm shrank, its aura and flames rapidly increased. The aura it emitted was more than twice as strong as before. Guqiaoyan's pupils shrank as a thick sense of shock rose in her eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang's martial skill can actually change in this way. Most importantly, the outcome of this battle would be different. Let's end this competition. Chapter 2238. Boom. Infernal Divine Palm and Sacred Green Flame Palm collided with each other in front of everyone's shocked eyes. A thunderous sound from the ninth heaven reverberated, and it was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. An exceptionally terrifying yuan energy storm formed in the air. Two bursts of energy swept across wildly before exploding in midair. Boom boom boom. The sound of the explosion continued to reverberate, and the spectating disciples could not help but use their yuan energy to protect their ears. Otherwise, immersing themselves in such sounds might cause them to lose their sense of hearing. The array on the tournament stage had been activated immediately, forming a pale golden protective shield. The protective shield completely isolated the yuan energy ripples, preventing it from leaking out and affecting the spectating disciples. However, from the violent fluctuations of the protective shield, one could tell just how terrifying the energy on the tournament stage was. The spectating disciples were all dumbfounded. Even in all the matches that they had watched yesterday, there was nothing as exciting as this. My God, Guqiaoyan has already used her trump card. I wonder if Bailey Hongzhuang can withstand it? I feel that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability is stronger than Guqiaoyan's. Her contract beast has yet to make a move. If Bailey Hongzhuang allows her contract beast to make a move, Guqiaoyan will definitely lose. This Bailey Hongzhuang is really a genius. Not only is she a genius alchemist, she's also a genius cultivator. Her age is younger than Guqiaoyan by a few years. If she's the same age as Guqiaoyan, wouldn't she defeat Guqiaoyan in one move? At this moment, all the disciples' gazes towards Bailey Hongzhuang changed. This kind of Bailey Hongzhuang was already much stronger than the average disciple in Tiangang's sect. Even Han Xiling could not be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang. You guys still say that Bailey Hongzhuang is not worthy of young sect master. I feel that Bailey Hongzhuang is an absolute goddess. In the entire Tiangang sect, aside from Bailey Hongzhuang, who else is worthy of young sect master? Ever since the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang has gained many supporters in Tiangang sect. Now, after witnessing her performance on the tournament stage, everyone was filled with anticipation. After witnessing Bailey Hongzhuang's display of power, the medicine sect's disciples finally understood why Bailey Hongzhuang had chosen to stay in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. This was because her innate talent in cultivation was also extremely outstanding. Genius. At this moment, almost every disciple felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was a genius. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes she was still a genius, she was still a genius. As long as she was given a few more years, Bailey Hongzhuang's strength would definitely be amazing. Inside the protective barrier, energy ripples swept out crazily. Red and green energy intertwined continuously, making it impossible for the audience to see the situation on the stage. This energy ripple is so terrifying. I wonder if Hongzhuang will be injured? A touch of worry appeared in Xia Jiqing's eyes. They were standing outside the protective shield and naturally were not affected in the slightest. However, the energy within the protective shield was enough to seriously injure people. Don't worry. With Hongzhuang's strength, this is definitely not a problem. Dongfang Yu's face was filled with a confident and brilliant smile. With his understanding of Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to handle this match with ease. This is not Bailey Hongzhuang's full strength. She will definitely win this match. Chapter 2239. Gui Jianyuan stood beside Shin Xiuhan and fixed his gaze on the stage. He smiled faintly and said, "Junior brother Shin, what do you think of junior sister Bailey's strength?" He had already noticed the conflict between Shin Xiuhan and Bailey Hongzhuang. Towards Bailey Hongzhuang he was not envious of Bailey Hongzhuang like the others. Instead he felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was an elegant and talented woman. Not to mention the first time he had spoken to Bailey Hongzhuang had been modest and polite. Even with the young lord's judgment, Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely not a seductive person. When Bailey Hongzhuang had tested her strength on the ranking pillar for the first time, she had already surpassed all the new disciples. Even some of the older disciples had been surpassed by Bailey Hongzhuang. To be able to reach such a cultivation at such a young age, it was impossible that she had not worked hard. Hearing Gui Jianyuan's words, Shin Xiuhan's expression remained cold. "It's just a small trick. With such strength it's easy to deal with." Gui Jianyuan chuckled. "I feel that this is not all of junior sister Bailey's strength. When junior brother Shin was a new disciple, you also did not have the strength to participate in the competition of the four palaces." The moment he said that, Shin Xiuhan's expression turned ugly. Indeed, as Gui Jianyuan had said when he first came to Tiangang's sect, although the palace master and elders thought highly of him as a new disciple, there was still a big gap between his strength and the older disciples. However, in the second competition of the four palaces, he had already performed extremely well. However, on this point he was indeed not as good as Bailey Hongzhuang. Even if he did not want to admit it, it was a fact that everyone knew. "Senior brother Gui, what do you mean?" Shin Xiuhan turned to look at Gui Jianyuan with a cold look in his eyes. Gui Jianyuan smiled faintly. "Junior brother Shin, you think too much. I just wanted to say that Bailey Hongzhuang is also a genius." With that, Gui Jianyuan returned to his seat and didn't intend to say anything more. Shin Xiuhan's face turned cold. In the entire Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, he feared no one except Gui Jianyuan. As the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's eldest senior brother, Gui Jianyuan's relationship with the disciples had always been very good. Furthermore, his reputation was very high. Not only that, Gui Jianyuan was also very strong and had a very good relationship with the elders and palace masters. This was something that even he couldn't compare to. Moreover, he felt that Gui Jianyuan might be hiding something. The strength he had displayed might not be his true strength. It was precisely because he always had a feeling of being unable to see through Gui Jianyuan that he had always been wary of him. As the dust on the martial arts stage gradually dissipated, everyone gradually saw the situation on the martial arts stage. However, when everyone saw the situation on the martial arts stage clearly, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He saw Guqiaoyan standing on one side of the stage in a sorry state. Blood was flowing out from the corner of her mouth. Her breath was weak and her hair was messy. It was obvious that she was exhausted. As one of the top 10 in White Tiger Palace, she was actually in such a sorry state. It was very different from what everyone had imagined. When everyone's gaze shifted to Bailey Hongzhuang, their expressions became even more interesting. Chapter 2240. Such a stark contrast gave everyone an indescribable shock. For a time, everyone looked at this scene and did not make a sound for a long time. Originally, everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was not Guqiaoyan's opponent at all, but now, Guqiaoyan had become like this, while Bailey Hongzhuang was safe and sound. Didn't this mean that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was much stronger than Guqiaoyan's? This was a bit too incredible. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang wins. Under such circumstances, even the referee elder's reaction was sluggish for a moment, but he quickly reacted and announced the result of the competition. With the referee elder's voice falling, everyone recovered from the shock and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a sudden change in their eyes. "Senior Gua, thank you for letting me win." Bailey Hongzhuang slowly bowed before walking down the stage. Guqiaoyan's appearance was extremely embarrassing, and her expression was extremely complicated. However, the touch of unwillingness in the depths of her eyes had disappeared. In this competition she accepted her loss wholeheartedly. Dong Fengyu, Xia Jiqing and the others' faces flashed with a happy smile. On one hand they were happy for Bailey Hongzhuang's victory, and on the other hand they could get a lot of cultivation resources from this bet. This feeling was like they had received inside information before the competition. They had earned too much. Di Baichen's face was filled with a faint smile. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation time was not as long as some disciples, her strength was already stronger than many of the disciples. He believed that with Hongzhuang's strength, it would not be a problem for her to enter the finals. It was just that the ranking in the finals could not be determined. After all, the strength of the top masters of the 4 major palaces was extremely powerful. After the end of the competition, Bailey Hongzhuang did not continue to watch the competition, but returned to her palace. She did not intend to spend the whole day here. Cultivating for one more day would increase her strength by a bit. What's more, her goal was never the competition between the 4 palaces, but the battle for the throne. Regarding Bailey Hongzhuang's departure, many disciples had noticed, but at this moment, everyone had already regarded Bailey Hongzhuang as a true master worthy of respect. After the second round of the preliminaries, there were only 20 disciples left out of the 40. These 20 disciples could be said to be the top strength of the 4 palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang cultivated in the desert world for 3 days, and then recovered her yuan qi in the cultivation room. When the sun rose, her essence, qi and spirit had returned to their peak. Wife, your performance yesterday was very wonderful. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang stop cultivating, Di Beichen laughed. Today is the 3rd preliminary round. As long as you can pass today's round, you will be able to enter the finals. However, there is a high chance that you will encounter a strong opponent. The later the competition, the higher the probability of meeting a strong master. Once she met one of the 4 great masters, it would not be so easy to advance. He had confidence in Hongzhuang's strength, but the 4 great masters were also extremely powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Different situations call for different measures. If we really meet them, then we can only fight. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang so calm, Di Beichen smiled. My wife's luck has always been good. Even if we really meet, the outcome is still unknown. Chapter 2241. When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived at the tournament arena once again, she discovered that the contestant area was much more spacious. Today there were only 5 people left, so naturally it was extremely spacious. On the contrary, the number of disciples on the spectator stand was increasing. Originally, there were still some disciples who did not come to watch the preliminary round. Now that it was nearing the end, the disciples all rushed over. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples in the competition area and discovered that the few people in front of her were all familiar faces. Gui Jianyuan, Shen Xiuhan, Tan Lihan and Yi Qinyu, including her, were the final 5 people left in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Junior sister Bailey, you've come. Yi Qinyu took the initiative to greet Bailey Hongzhuang when he saw her arrive. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Senior brother Yi, you've come really early. The moment she saw Yi Qinyu, Bailey Hongzhuang had a new assessment of Yi Qinyu's strength in her heart. Yesterday, after the competition, she had left and did not pay attention to the situation of the other disciples' competition. Now that there were only 5 people left in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, the strength of these 5 people was really extremely strong. The moment Bailey Hongzhuang appeared, Tan Lihan's gaze had already landed on her. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang, it could be said that she was getting more and more displeased. With her strength, to be able to last till this round was all thanks to her good luck in yesterday's draw. Today's preliminary round would most likely result in her being eliminated. Bailey Hongzhuang naturally would not ignore Tan Lihan's gaze, especially after seeing Tan Lihan's indignant look. Bailey Hongzhuang ridiculed, "Oh, senior sister Tan, looks like your luck yesterday wasn't bad to actually be able to last till this round. If I didn't guess wrongly, the person you drew should be the existence at the bottom right?" Once those words were said, Tan Lihan's face instantly darkened. She did not expect that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually take the initiative to provoke her today. How hateful. However, what Bailey Hongzhuang said was the truth. Even if Tan Lihan wanted to object, she could not say any words to refute. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Tan Lihan's unyielding and helpless look as the corners of her lips could not help but curl up a little. I was just randomly guessing. Looking at senior sister Tan's expression, I guessed right? Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Tan Lihan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know it all. Bailey Hongzhuang, Tan Lihan's face, Bailey Hongzhuang's, Lihan's, Bailey Hongzhuang's Hongzhuang Yi. Bailey Hongzhuang sneered, "When you slandered me in front of so many people, why didn't you let yourself go too far? You Bailey Hongzhuang's S." Bailey Hongzhuang looked disdainfully at Tan Lihan, then sat down on her own seat. In the past, she was used to keeping a low profile and being kind to others in Tiangang's sect. However, some people refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Since that was the case, there was no need for her to pretend to be kind. Deep down, she was not a very good person. After all, many people had died in her hands all these years. She was going to take part in the Battle of Zhuolu. The Battle of Zhuolu was a team competition. When the time came, she would most likely take part in the Battle of Zhuolu together with Xin Xiuhan and the rest. Rather than being questioned by this group of people during the Battle of Zhuolu, she might as well start the conflict right from the start. Chapter 2242. After Bailey Hongzhuang said these words, Tan Lihan's face turned red and white, but as Bailey Hongzhuang said, she really had no right to say such words. You relied on young sect master to get to where you are today. What I said is the truth. Tan Lihan retorted. This was something that all the disciples of Tiangang sect agreed on. She just said this in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang laughed instead of being angry, but her eyes became sharper. Suddenly, Bailey Hongzhuang changed the topic and said, Which eye of yours saw that I relied on young sect master to get to where I am today? Do you have evidence? Along the way, I have seen a lot of people like you. Seeing that others have strength, you are jealous. You have to find some reasons to prove that others have used some messy means to get to where they are now. It seems that if you don't find a reason like this, you will be unhappy. If you are really so strong, why don't you have some means? Since coming to Tiangang sect, Bailey Hongzhuang had been suffering such criticism. She didn't care because the innocent would know that they were innocent, and because once others began to deceive themselves, even if you explained it, it was useless. However, she heard that Tan Lihan was talking about her on the surface, but at the same time she also spread rumors in other places. She couldn't stand it anymore. Bailey Hongzhuang's words could be said to have an immediate effect. She directly picked out everything and went straight to the point, leaving no chance to cover it up. For a moment, Tan Lihan was also speechless. Evidence? She really didn't have it, but after knowing the relationship between Bailey Hongzhuang and young sect master, she already thought so. Yi Qingyu and Gui Jianyuan had been smiling faintly as they watched the verbal confrontation between Bailey Hongzhuang and Tan Lihan. They usually saw Bailey Hongzhuang's polite and humble appearance. Today they saw another side of Bailey Hongzhuang. This kind of Bailey Hongzhuang was very real, but it didn't make people feel disgusted. Compared to some people who pretended to be saints, Bailey Hongzhuang was much better. When Xin Xiuhan saw that Tan Lihan was at a loss for words, he couldn't help but frown. Junior sister Bailey, do you dare to say that you didn't approach the young sect master because of his identity? He didn't want to talk about Bailey Hongzhuang, but Tan Lihan was speechless, so he had to speak up. Hee hee. Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled, and her smile became more brilliant and enchanting. Don't you know what the situation was when your young lord left Tiangang sect? As soon as he said this, Xin Xiuhan, Yi Qingyu and the others' faces changed. If it wasn't for this, how could a woman from a small dynasty like me possibly know him? Don't think that everyone is as dirty as you. If you can think that way, it usually means that you are such a person. With that, Bailey Hongzhuang waited quietly for the competition to begin. At this point there was no need to say more. Xin Xiuhan and the others' hearts were in a perilous situation. They had more or less heard some inside information about the young sect master leaving Tiangang sect. Even if the palace master and elders didn't give any confirmation, they still knew that those things weren't rumors. In that case, the situation was completely different from what they had imagined. Chapter 2243. Xin Xiuhan felt as if he had been slapped in the face. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang, he could no longer say the words he had said before. If Bailey Hongzhuang had accompanied the young sect master in that kind of situation, then the young sect master's love for Bailey Hongzhuang was not hard to understand. After all, this kind of woman was what every man looked forward to. Junior sister Bailey, let's go up on stage and draw lots. Gui Jianyuan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile and said, All right. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately walked up to the high platform with Gui Jianyuan and the rest to draw their lots. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the lot in her hand. Her opponent today was a disciple from the Black Tortoise Hall. His number was 5 and could be said to be in the middle. This competition between the 4 palaces was a competition of the strength of the disciples from the 4 palaces. Hence, disciples from their own palaces would not meet disciples from their own palaces. As for the results of this competition between the 4 palaces, it would be decided based on the number of disciples in the finals. After all, there were a total of 10 disciples in the finals. The 4 palaces could not divide them equally. If two palaces had the same number of disciples in the finals, it would be decided based on the highest ranking of the disciples. As of now, there were 6 people from the Azure Dragon Hall, 5 from the White Tiger Hall, 5 from the Vermilion Bird Hall, and 4 from the Black Tortoise Hall. Based on this situation, the Azure Dragon Hall was in an advantageous position. The Black Tortoise Hall was very likely to be in last place. The White Tiger Hall and the Vermilion Bird Hall were in the middle. As for the general ranking of the 4 palaces, it would be more or less known after the 3rd round of the preliminary competition. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the Black Tortoise Hall disciple that she was matched against. It seemed that her luck was not bad and she had not met the strongest disciple from the Black Tortoise Hall. When Yi Chenyu saw the lot that Bailey Hongzhuang had drawn, his expression could not help but change. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and asked, "Senior brother Yi, is there a problem with the lot that I drew?" Hearing this, Yi Chenyu shook his head. "Your lot isn't bad. After all, you didn't meet the strongest person from the other 3 halls. However, you can't say that you were lucky because your opponent is ranked 2nd in the martial hall. He is also very strong. Yan Yuhuan, he's usually a very low-key person and he doesn't reveal much of his strength. According to my judgment, Yan Yuhuan's strength is probably at Green Realm level 4 or even stronger." Now that they had entered the 3rd preliminary round of the competition of the 4 palaces, the opponents they would encounter were each stronger than the last. There was no hope of relying on luck anymore. They could only rely on their own strength. Green Realm level 4. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. He was indeed a formidable opponent. "Junior sister Bailey, you have to be careful in this match. I'm afraid you'll have to give it your all." The 2nd place of the martial arts hall was no joke. "Thank you for your reminder, senior apprentice brother Yi. I will pay attention to it." Although her opponent was extremely strong, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was still calm as usual. She was already prepared to meet such a strong cultivator. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang could still be so calm after knowing Yan Yuhuan's strength, Yi Chenyu could not help but be amazed. It seemed that junior sister Bailey's strength was really a mystery. He had some understanding of the strength of the famous disciples in the sect. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was an exception. Chapter 2244. In the 3rd round of the preliminaries, every match was extremely exciting. Other than the 4 great experts, almost every disciple had used all their skills. Because if they did not use all their strength at this time, they would not have the slightest bit of hope. When Bailey Hongzhuang noticed that Tan Lihan's opponent was the number 2 expert of the Azure Dragon Hall, she already knew that Tan Lihan would lose without a doubt. In reality, it was just as Bailey Hongzhuang thought. Tan Lihan did not even have the chance to use all her skills when she was forced off the stage. In response, Tan Lihan could only walk down the stage with a dejected face. She had already expected to lose this match, but she did not expect to lose so miserably. When she felt Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze on her, Tan Lihan coldly said, "Don't be so proud. Yan Yuhuan's strength is also very strong. I'm afraid that you will lose more miserably than me." "Then I'm afraid that you will be disappointed." Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged her shoulders and still had an indifferent expression. Tan Lihan puffed up her cheeks and sat down. Originally, she did not want to continue staying here after losing so much face. However, seeing Bailey Hongzhuang being so arrogant, she wanted to see how Bailey Hongzhuang would lose later. The 5th match, Vermilion Bird Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang vs Black Tortoise Hall's Yan Yuhuan. Following the announcement of Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan's names, there was a commotion in the spectators' stand. Bailey Hongzhuang's luck is not good today. She actually met Yan Yuhuan. She will lose for sure. Yan Yuhuan's temper is similar to Yan Bin's. Normally, no one would be willing to provoke him. Moreover, this guy does not have any tender feelings for the fairer sex. Bailey Hongzhuang is already a genius to be able to enter the 3rd round. Don't forget that she is a new disciple. On the martial arts stage, Bailey Hongzhuang listened to the whispers of the audience. Suddenly, she understood Yan Yuhuan a bit more. It seemed that Yan Yuhuan's strength was truly formidable. That was why there were so many disciples who thought highly of him. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Yan Yuhuan, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This guy's name and appearance didn't match at all. Hearing the name Yan Yuhuan, one would think that this person was an imposing and handsome man. However, the man in front of them was clearly a burly man. Just by looking at his well-built body, one could tell how strong Yan Yuhuan's muscles were. For such a ferocious person to have such a refined name, there was a sense of incongruity. In fact, not only Bailey Hongzhuang felt this way, but the disciples of the entire Tiangang sect felt so. Begin. With the referee elder's command, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yen Yuhuan immediately entered a state of confrontation. Junior sister Bailey, I've always admired you. As a genius alchemist, you've restored the dignity of Tiangang sect, and you're able to reach this step in cultivation. You're indeed a proud daughter of heaven. I don't want to hurt you. Why don't you withdraw from this competition? I'm such a boorish person. Once I start fighting, I won't be able to distinguish the severity of the situation. Yen Yuhuan scratched his head and his expression revealed a bit of embarrassment. He had a bad habit. Once he started fighting, he would not recognize anyone. He admired Bailey Hongzhuang very much and didn't want to hurt her. Chapter 2245. Bailey Hongzhuang sized up Yen Yuhuan for a moment and already knew that Yen Yuhuan's words were sincere and did not have any other meaning. However, she had stayed in Tiangang sect for so long and Yen Yuhuan was probably the most unique disciple she had seen. Not only Bailey Hongzhuang, but the disciples present were also taken aback after hearing Yen Yuhuan's words. Usually, Yen Yuhuan was someone who did not know how to be gentle with women. Who would have thought that in front of Bailey Hongzhuang, Yen Yuhuan would actually take the initiative to remind her? This was not in line with Yen Yuhuan's usual style. Thank you, senior brother Yen, for your reminder. I will be careful. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly, but her words had already expressed her attitude very clearly. She understood that Yen Yuhuan was reminding her out of good intentions, but she would not give up on this competition so easily. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's firm attitude, Yen Yuhuan could only sigh. However, if it was anyone else, they would not give up so easily under such circumstances. Since junior sister Bailey has already made up her mind, then be careful. Following Yen Yuhuan's words, surging and powerful Yuan power almost instantly burst out from Yen Yuhuan's body. This kind of fluctuation far surpassed the ordinary disciples who were participating in the competition of the four halls. Feeling this kind of fluctuation, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes narrowed and her expression became more dignified. Just as Yi Qinyu had told her, Yen Yuhuan's strength had already reached Green Realm Level 4. Moreover, his aura was much stronger than an ordinary Green Realm Level 4 cultivator. It seemed that Yen Yuhuan's strength was indeed worthy of his reputation. No wonder he had warned her previously. However, her current strength was not weak either. In addition to her various trump cards, if they were to really cross swords, the outcome would not be known. One had to know that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability to fight beyond her level had always been good. In the next moment, Yen Yuhuan raised his right hand and a golden long spear appeared in his hand. Yen Yuhuan's figure moved and his figure suddenly swept out. The long spear in his hand danced out several golden spear flowers, which were incomparably swift and fierce, enveloping Bailey Hongzhuang's vital points. Ding ding. The spear flowers swept past, and just as they were about 3 meters away from Bailey Hongzhuang, the glass sword in her hand also shot out rays of sword light, colliding with the spear flowers with a loud bang. Immediately, sparks flew in all directions, and a berserk wind swept out from the point of contact. At the same time, Bailey Hongzhuang's speed was also extremely fast. With a flash of her shadow, she turned into a ray of white light and quickly approached Yen Yuhuan. The sharp sword in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand pierced out, aiming for Yen Yuhuan's vitals at a tricky angle. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, Yen Yuhuan's eyes lit up. He pointed the spear in his hand at the ground and bent it at a strange angle. His body shot out and dodged Bailey Hongzhuang's attack. Ding ding ding. After Yen Yuhuan's body shot out, he quickly attacked Bailey Hongzhuang again, and a violent and fierce attack erupted in an instant. Bailey Hongzhuang was not afraid at all. Her sharp sword danced and her figure was ethereal. The two figures intertwined like a whirlwind. The spear flowers and the sword light constantly collided, dazzling the eyes of the spectators. Seeing this scene, the disciples present could not help but be secretly speechless. Chapter 2246. At this moment, Yen Yuhuan's gaze towards Bailey Hongzhuang had changed. Previously, he had assumed that Bailey Hongzhuang's attainments in pill refinement were extremely shocking and she still had a long way to go in terms of cultivation. However, based on the current situation, Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation did not seem to be much weaker than his. If his judgment was correct, Bailey Hongzhuang was also a Green Realm 4th level cultivator. At this moment he suddenly understood why Bailey Hongzhuang was able to remain unscathed when she was dealing with Guo. That was because Bailey Hongzhuang had been concealing her cultivation from the start. Her powers were much stronger than Guo, so she was able to remain unscathed under that kind of attack. In a competition like the Battle of the Four Palaces, many cultivators would intentionally conceal their cultivation in order to lower their opponent's guard. Once the other party was underestimated, the other party would reveal many flaws. Furthermore, to a cultivator, no matter when, as long as they were able to conceal some of their trump cards, it would be good. If the other disciples were already familiar with their moves, then their safety would be much less guaranteed. Junior sister Bailey, it seems that I have underestimated you. I never thought that your talent in cultivation would be so shocking. Unlike other cultivators, Yan Yuhuan admired Bailey Hongzhuang even more after witnessing Bailey Hongzhuang's powers. Bailey Hongzhuang was a true genius. Senior brother Yan, you flatter me. Since junior sister Bailey's powers are so great, then I don't have to hold back anymore. Junior sister, please receive my attack. Senior brother, please. Even though the battle between both parties was in full swing, the exchange between the two of them was extremely harmonious. Obviously, no matter who the final winner of this competition was, it would not affect their view of each other. In the next instant, Yan Yuhuan's expression became much more solemn. His hands slowly formed a strange seal. Following the change of his seal, the Yuan power that surged around his body suddenly started to boil. Following the change of the palm print, Bailey Hongzhuang discovered that behind Yan Yuhuan, a dark blue energy suddenly rose up, as if a huge ocean had appeared behind him. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression changed. Yan Yuhuan was using his true strength. Earth-tier martial skill. After seeing the energy emitted by this martial skill, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately judged the level of this martial skill with her sharp eyes. Earth-rank martial skills, every martial skill was not simple. In the previous battles, most of the disciples were executing profound rank martial skills. Currently, only Yan Yuhuan was executing earth-rank martial skills. After Yan Yuhuan executed the earth-rank martial skill, the expressions of the disciples present changed abruptly. The might of an earth-rank martial skill was much stronger than a profound rank martial skill. Jade Waves Torrential Heavens. This is the earth-tier martial skill, Jade Waves Torrential Heavens. I never thought that senior brother Yan would actually be able to execute this move successfully. The might of an earth-rank martial skill is much stronger than a profound rank martial skill. If Bailey Hongzhuang has not grasped an earth-rank martial skill, then she will definitely lose this battle. Billowing Jade Waves is an extremely famous martial skill in the Black Martial Hall. However, there are very few disciples who are able to learn and grasp it. Senior brother Yan has improved a lot in this period of time. Chapter 2247. However, there were not many disciples who were able to learn Jade Waves. Earth-rank martial skills were different from profound rank martial skills. The higher the rank of the martial skill, the more difficult it would be to cultivate it. The time it would take would also increase. Once an earth-rank martial skill was mastered, the cultivator's battle strength would greatly increase. When the Black Tortoise Hall Master, Gu Jingqing, saw that Yan Yuhuan had successfully executed Jade Waves, a gratified smile appeared on his face. As the second-ranked expert in the Black Tortoise Hall, Yan Yuhuan was also a cultivation maniac. Furthermore, his simple and honest character was completely different from the reserved and gloomy character of ordinary cultivators. It was easier for people to have a good impression of him. This kind of cultivator was one-track-minded. However, when he cultivated, he was also very practical and would never take advantage of opportunities. It was because of this that Yan Yuhuan's cultivation was also very pure. He had the same temperament as Yan Bin and he liked him very much. Hallmaster Qin, it seems that Bailey Hongzhuang is in some danger this time. Gu Jingqing smiled and said. Among the 4 hall masters, he had the closest relationship with Qin Ai. They often joked around and at this moment he did not have any scruples. Hearing Gu Jingqing's words, Qin Ai was silent for a moment. To be honest, he was also unable to determine the result of this competition. After all, he had never understood Bailey Hongzhuang's strength before this. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's performance so far had always given people a feeling of amazement, her opponent was Yan Yuhuan. The result was really hard to say. On one hand, the testing apparatus was based on the length of time a cultivator could last inside. On the other hand, it was based on the cultivator's age. Bailey Hongzhuang was evaluated as a heaven-rank martial skill. This proved that her potential was absolutely shocking. As for Bailey Hongzhuang's current strength, Qin AI only felt that since Bailey Hongzhuang could last for such a long time in the apparatus, her strength should not be weak. Hallmaster Gu, everything is not over yet. It's better not to make a judgment too early. Just as Qin AI was thinking about how to answer, Di Beichen's faint laughter had already sounded first. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Gu Jingqing and Qin AI could not help but be stunned. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Young Sect Master had watched so many matches but had never once expressed his opinion. Now that he had suddenly expressed his opinion, moreover he thought highly of Bailey Hongzhuang, that had an extraordinary meaning. Young Sect Master and Bailey Hongzhuang were a pair. They didn't understand Bailey Hongzhuang's ability, but Young Sect Master definitely did. Now that Young Sect Master had said this, it proved that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability wasn't that simple. Even if Yan Yuhuan made a move, Bailey Hongzhuang might not necessarily lose. If that's really the case, then Bailey Hongzhuang is really amazing. Gu Jingqing smiled faintly and said. They had always had a good impression of Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment he naturally did not wish for Bailey Hongzhuang to fail. After Bailey Hongzhuang saw Yan Yuhuan displaying an earth-rank martial skill, her reaction was extremely fast. Instantly, a hand seal that no one had ever seen before condensed between Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. Lines of complicated seals emitted a fiery red light, bright and resplendent. At the same time, the crowd felt that with Bailey Hongzhuang as the center, the temperature around her rapidly rose. Following that, under the crowd's shocked gazes, a ball of fire suddenly formed behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2248. Boom. After the sea of fire appeared, the air in the entire area seemed to have ignited and the terrifying heat wave caused the space to distort. Most importantly, the sea of fire that Bailey Hongzhuang had condensed was not the slightest bit weaker than Yan Yuhuan's. After seeing this scene, the spectators' stand instantly exploded with sounds of inhaling cold air. Each and every disciple's eyes were filled with fear and passion. This level of martial skill was what they had yearned for even in their dreams. I never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had also grasped an earth-rank martial skill. At her age, her cultivation talent is even more powerful than the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Shin Xiuhan. I remember that this isn't the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's martial skill. How did Bailey Hongzhuang grasp it? This match is truly unexpected and exciting. At this moment, I really don't know who will emerge victorious in the end. Excited and fanatical gazes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan's bodies. The collision of two cultivators with such strength was the most attractive. Tan Lihan originally wanted to see Bailey Hongzhuang make a fool of herself. She never thought that not only did Bailey Hongzhuang not make a fool of herself, she had even stolen the limelight. Tan Lihan's face was ashen. As a Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciple, she had the opportunity to learn the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's earth-rank martial skill. However, it was not an easy task to obtain the recognition of an earth-rank martial skill. At least she had not managed to do so. Although she had always been envious of cultivators who had grasped earth-rank martial skills, the number of disciples who had failed was even higher. Hence, she had never felt that there was anything wrong with it. However, as a new disciple, Bailey Hongzhuang had actually grasped an earth-rank martial skill. This was a blatant slap to the face. Sea of Fire's Burial. Bailey Hongzhuang secretly shouted. The Sea of Fire's Burial was the first earth-rank martial skill that she had grasped in her previous life. Its power was extremely powerful. Back then, she had spent quite a bit of effort to cultivate the Sea of Fire's Burial. Fortunately, she had successfully learned it in the end and was able to use it with ease. In this life, she had saved a lot of time on cultivating martial skills. If not for this, she would still have a long way to go before she could reach her current level of cultivation. It was precisely because she could save time in these areas that she was able to catch up to Lan Qingyan. After all, she did not believe that Lan Qingyan was also a transmigrator like her. Yan Yuhuan's eyes lit up when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's martial skill. He was even more surprised in his heart. Bailey Hongzhuang really hid her strength well. Junior sister Bailey, you've really hidden your strength well. No matter what the result of this competition is, I, Yan Yuhuan, am convinced by you. Yan Yuhuan admired the strong the most since he was born. With Bailey Hongzhuang's age, being able to cultivate to this level already proved that her talent was much stronger than his. If Bailey Hongzhuang was the same age as him, she would be even more powerful than the four great masters. If the four great masters were to be placed in front of her, they would be instantly turned into dregs. Hearing Yan Yuhuan's praise without the slightest bit of hypocrisy, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a smile. Senior brother Yan, I, Bailey Hongzhuang, also admire you. However, cultivators who had reached this stage were not ordinary people. Almost all of them were proud and arrogant people. It was not easy to get them to admit that someone was very strong. Chapter 2249. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan had a tacit understanding, and the two attacks collided with each other in front of countless shocked eyes. Boom! The earth-shaking power burst out, and the sound of thunder from the ninth heaven resounded crazily, sweeping over the mountains of Tiangang's sect. The elemental energy storm quickly swept across, and the elemental energy in the air boiled. The terrifying collision between the blue ocean and the red sea of fire created a huge heat wave that seemed to be able to engulf everything. The sea of fire was constantly extinguished and the ocean was constantly evaporated. The entire world seemed to be about to collapse under such an attack. It was terrifying and horrifying. The surrounding disciples looked at this scene in shock. This scene was more shocking than any of the previous matches they had seen. The nearby disciples had covered their ears with elemental energy, but their ears were still numb and painful. Under such a terrifying collision, the disciples only felt their scalps go numb. If they were to be under such an attack, they would have died without a corpse. I didn't expect junior sister Bailey's strength to have reached such a stage. It's really shocking. Yichenyu looked at this scene in shock. He had long known that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was not what ordinary people had guessed. However, at this moment when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's true strength, he couldn't help but be shocked. Bailey Hongzhuang was only 19 years old. With such talent, even compared to the successors of some forces, she wasn't any weaker. With junior sister Bailey's ability to stand beside the young sect master, I'm afraid there's no one more suitable than her. Gui Jinyuan's eyes were filled with a complicated and deep light. One couldn't judge a book by its cover. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance was shocking, she was definitely not a flower vase. Such a woman was the real pride of the heavens. In this world, the kind of person attracted the kind of people. If Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't so outstanding, how could she attract such an outstanding young sect master? When Shin Xiuhan saw this scene, he couldn't help but be moved. He didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang's strength to be so much stronger than he had expected. Before this, he had purposely checked Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's entire body seemed to be wrapped in a cloud of fog and he couldn't see through it. When the crowd saw the situation on the stage, the disciples couldn't help but gasp. This was because a huge pit had appeared on the stage which had always been shockingly defensive. There were also burn marks around it. Such destructive power was shocking. The crowd's eyes quickly turned to look at Yan Yuhuan's body. His clothes were charred black and he was in a sorry state. Drip, drip. Blood flowed down Yan Yuhuan's arm and slowly dripped to the ground, making a subtle sound that could not be ignored. It's not only of the crowd size, it also was beyond everyone's expectations. Of Bailey Hongzhuang's. When everyone saw Bailey Hongzhuang, their eyes couldn't help but change again. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's hair was a bit more moist, a bit less elegant. On her white robe, there were a few enchanting blossoms of blood, revealing a bit of desolate beauty. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was pale but her eyes were still bright. Chapter 2250. When the spectating disciples saw that Yan Yuhuan and Bailey Hongzhuang were still able to look at each other and smile despite being injured, their faces were filled with doubt. They couldn't understand the attitude of Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan. What's going on? Who won? Could it be a draw? A disciple couldn't help but ask. It was obvious that both Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan were injured, but it was impossible to tell who won. The referee elder hasn't announced the result yet. It should be because it hasn't been decided yet. After seeing this scene, Gui Jinyuan's lips slowly curved into a smile. Junior sister Bailey and junior brother Yan are in love with each other. As far as cultivators were concerned, many of them were friends that were forged through fighting. This kind of friendship was inexplicable compared to ordinary friendship, but it was unexpectedly trustworthy. Junior sister Bailey's performance in the Battle of the Four Palaces this time could be said to be shocking. If my judgment isn't wrong, junior sister Bailey shouldn't be 20 years old yet. Yichenyu sighed. Gui Jinyuan nodded, less than 20 years old and already in the 4th level of the Green Realm. The strength is somewhat shocking. Junior sister Bailey is not an ordinary person. In the future, her achievements will be above us. Gue Jianyuan smiled faintly. Following Gue Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu's conversation, Shin Xiuhan and Tan Lihan's faces became very ugly. Based on the strength that Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed, their previous ridicule could be said to be a slap in the face. Junior sister Bailey, if you don't have any questions, how about we continue the competition? Yen Yuhuan smiled brightly. In the previous confrontation they were indeed injured. However, their fighting strength didn't completely dissipate because of these injuries. On the contrary, they still had the strength to fight. Under such circumstances, no one was willing to admit defeat. Therefore, there was only one way, to continue the competition. Alright. Bailey Hongzhuang's pale face blossomed into a flower-like smile. It was a bit less bright and beautiful, but it was also a bit more poignant, but it was especially provocative. In the next moment, before the crowd could even react, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yen Yuhuan had already entered the battle once again. Yen Yuhuan's body surged with elemental energy. A monstrous amount of elemental energy whizzed out from his dantian and gathered in his hands. As he flipped his hands, Yen Yuhuan's expression was solemn. Bailey Hongzhuang's strength had exceeded his expectations. If he didn't use his trump card, he might lose to Bailey Hongzhuang. He admired Bailey Hongzhuang, but he didn't want to give up the opportunity to enter the battle for the throne. He had to win this competition. To win this competition. At this moment, a huge crater had appeared in the middle of the stage. Only the sides of the stage were still standing. Everyone could imagine what sort of situation would occur on the martial competition platform if another wave of attacks from these two people appeared. Following Yen Yuhuan's hand seal, an elemental energy fluctuation that wasn't any weaker than the blue waves instantly spread out. It was the same blue energy. However, it was deeper than the blue energy from before. Chapter 2251. After sensing the aura around Yen Yuhuan's body, Gu Jingqing's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Yen Yuhuan with a hint of shock. The four hall masters' gazes also landed on Yen Yuhuan. Qin Ai couldn't help but ask, Hall Master Gu, Yen Yuhuan has already learned this move? The astonishment in Gu Jingqing's eyes didn't dissipate. He only said, I also don't know when he learned it. The four hall masters looked at each other. It seemed that the disciples had spent a lot of effort to obtain a spot in the Battle of Zhuolu. In the past, the Battle of the Four Halls had never been so exciting. These fellows were all people who wouldn't use their full strength without any benefits. They would only use their full strength at a time like this. Hall Master Qin, it seems that Bailey Hongzhuang is in danger this time. Azure Dragon Hall Master Yen Kaiqing said slowly. Qin Ai smiled faintly. His expression didn't reveal any emotions. Let's wait and see. With Bailey Hongzhuang's age, it's already very shocking that she could reach this step. Yen Kaiqing and the other two nodded. They had to admit this point. Sky-swallowing jade waves. Yen Yuhuan shouted coldly. The terrifying blue ocean formed behind him once again. The dark blue energy emitted a shocking fluctuation. Compared to the previous sky-swallowing jade waves, the might of this sky-swallowing jade waves was even more terrifying. At this moment the energy was dark blue and was almost black. It was like a tsunami, surging and surging. It was as if a huge wave could completely drown a person. After seeing Yen Yuhuan's martial skill, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression couldn't help but change. She didn't expect the sky-swallowing jade waves to have a second stage. Its might was much stronger than before. If she didn't deal with it carefully, she would be seriously injured. When the disciples of the Big Dipper sect saw Yen Yuhuan use this move, they didn't know what to say. It said that only Yen Bin mastered the sky-swallowing jade waves of Black Tortoise Hall. I didn't expect Yen Yuhuan to have learned it too. His strength is really shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose now. He even used the sky-swallowing jade waves. Yen Yuhuan's ranking in Tiangang's sect will rise again. Isn't it obvious? Once this jade wave devours the heavens is unleashed, there aren't many people in the entire Heavenly Dipper sect that are Yen Yuhuan's opponent. Almost at the moment when Yen Yuhuan displayed the jade wave's monstrous heavens, the wind completely tilted towards Yen Yuhuan. Junior sister Bailey, thank you for letting me win. Yen Yuhuan grinned, revealing a row of white and neat teeth. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly said, Senior brother Yen, it's still too early to determine the outcome. In the next moment, under the astonished gazes of everyone, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression turned serious. At the same time, A dense blood aura erupted from Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Then a shocking pillar of blood shot up into the sky and enveloped Bailey Hongzhuang. At the same time, everyone felt a change in the air pressure. A kind of oppressive pressure spread rapidly with Bailey Hongzhuang as the center. A faint smell of blood wafted into everyone's nostrils. Everyone's eyes were locked onto the shocking pillar of blood. They didn't see Bailey Hongzhuang use any method. Why would such a pillar of blood appear out of nowhere? Chapter 2252. What kind of martial technique is Bailey Hongzhuang using? The pressure is so powerful. A disciple could not help but exclaim. I don't know. I've never seen such a martial technique before. Bailey Hongzhuang doesn't seem to have cultivated the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's secret techniques. This pressure is even more shocking than Yan Yuhuan's martial technique. Look, even Yan Yuhuan's heaven-swallowing jade waves is being suppressed. Following the emergence of this blood pillar, half of the sky above the battling platform was dyed blood red. Yan Yuhuan stared blankly at the scene and his mind was filled with doubts. He could acutely sense that the moment Bailey Hongzhuang used the blood pillar, the Yuan power in his body was being suppressed. Not only that, but the power of the heaven-swallowing jade waves was also being suppressed. It was as if his cultivation had been suppressed to the point that he could not unleash his full strength. This was the first time he had seen such a martial technique. Before he had seen it, he had never known that such a martial technique existed. If he could master this move, it would be a great weapon in this situation where one side was weak and the other side was strong. What is Bailey Hongzhuang using? Tan Lihan couldn't help but ask Xin Xiuhan, who was standing at the side. Such a martial technique gave people a feeling of shock just by looking at it. If she had not seen it with her own eyes, she would find it hard to believe that it was Bailey Hongzhuang who had used it. Xin Xiuhan's gaze was sharp as he stared at the blood aura that filled the sky. A possibility slowly surfaced in his mind. However, when he thought of this possibility, even he felt that it was unbelievable. Xin Xiuhan's gaze then shifted to Di Beichen. The moment he saw Di Beichen, he suddenly felt that everything might be true. Blood aura field. Junior sister Bailey has actually mastered the blood aura field. Yi Qinyu's voice became sharper. This news was more shocking than any other news he had heard before. To many people, the blood-ground abyss was a place where evil demons gathered. However, to cultivators like them, it was a good place to train. The most valuable thing in the blood-grave abyss was the blood aura field. Once one obtained the blood aura field, it was equivalent to having an extremely advantageous skill. Until now, everyone only knew that the young sect master had obtained the inheritance of the blood aura field. Among the cultivators of Tiangang sect, there were also many people who tried to break through the blood chi tower, but in the end they all returned in defeat. Unless one was a rare genius, it was impossible to reach the end of such an inheritance. Back then, when the young sect master had obtained the inheritance of the blood chi field, it had shocked everyone in the Xingxian continent. Many outstanding disciples had gone to the blood-grave abyss, but the young sect master was the only one who had succeeded. Just this point alone was enough to prove the young sect master's genius status. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had also obtained the inheritance of the blood chi tower. Didn't this mean that Bailey Hongzhuang's talent was also incomparable to many cultivators? You really can't judge a book by its cover. Junior sister Bailey has so many trump cards, yet she still allows others to mock her. She is really broad-minded. Gui Jianyuan laughed and shook his head. Any genius cultivator could not stand being looked down upon by others. Chapter 2253. Before Bailey Hongzhuang displayed her strength, all the disciples thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had gotten the chance to participate by taking the back door. Tan Lihan was even more excessive. She mocked Bailey Hongzhuang in front of everyone and put Bailey Hongzhuang in such an awkward situation. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not say anything from the beginning to the end. Even when someone said that she got in through the back door, she directly admitted it. Now, it seemed that after Bailey Hongzhuang displayed her true strength, it was really a slap in the face. Junior sister Bailey should be too lazy to care about it. Yi Qinyu smiled faintly. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current position in Tiangang sect, her backing was stronger than any other disciple. If Bailey Hongzhuang took it seriously, who could fight against Bailey Hongzhuang? As a disciple of Tiangang sect, Tan Lihan naturally knew how powerful the blood aura field was. At this moment, after hearing Gui Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu's conversation, her expression was extremely ugly. She did not even dare to think about the existence of the blood aura field. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was actually able to obtain such an inheritance. This gap. Palace Master Qin Bailey Hongzhuang actually obtained the blood aura field? Gu Jingqing could not help but be stunned after seeing this scene. They had seen this scene from Di Beichen before. Therefore, they had already determined it the moment they saw it. Qin Ai was also a little stunned. He really didn't know about this. Although Bailey Hongzhuang was a disciple of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, he did not have the slightest understanding of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. He did not even know when Bailey Hongzhuang went to the blood aura field. No wonder Bailey Hongzhuang was able to obtain first place in the assessment competition. She must have already obtained the blood aura field before participating in the assessment competition. The Azure Dragon Hall Master Yan Kaiqing quickly analyzed the situation. Obtaining the blood chi field required a certain level of cultivation. If Bailey Hongzhuang went to the Bloody Ground Abyss after coming to the Tiangang sect, then there was no possibility of obtaining the blood chi field. As Yan Kaiqing's voice sounded, Qin Ai and the rest nodded. Previously they had been so surprised that they did not understand this point. Now, after Yan Kaiqing's reminder, they also understood. First place in the assessment competition. It's not an undeserved reputation. No wonder Limitless Palace tried so hard to recruit Bailey Hongzhuang. The four temple masters sighed and smiled. Now it seemed that Bailey Hongzhuang was even more talented in cultivation than Han Xiling. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure slowly appeared in everyone's line of sight after the blood aura field was displayed. Her white robe was already stained with the color of blood. Her pair of blood-red eyes were like top-grade gems. They were sparkling and translucent, revealing an enchanting and unbridled beauty. Under the contrast of the bright red, Bailey Hongzhuang's pale face was even more enchanting. She was like a demon in the dark night. One look was enough to make people yearn for her. This was a face that was impeccable no matter how one looked at it. Heavy makeup was always appropriate. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's usual cold elegance, the charming Bailey Hongzhuang gave people a sense of shock. Towering Heaven Devil Lotus. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice sounded, a huge and shocking devil lotus gradually appeared in mid-air. A terrifying elemental energy wave spread out. Chapter 2254. Bang. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, the two attacks collided with a loud bang. It was a battle between bright red and deep blue. The entire sky seemed to be filled with these two colors and even the sun's brilliance was blocked out. The space between heaven and earth seemed to distort in an instant. Bang bang bang. The sound of the explosion was incessant and the yuan power in the air was boiling uncontrollably. However, what shocked the crowd was that the defensive barrier of the martial arts stage was already distorting under the impact of the two energies. It was as if it would shatter at any moment. Seeing this scene, the disciples who were closest to the martial arts stage could not help but retreat. Once the protective barrier was breached, they would be seriously injured. Gotcha. Suddenly, a cracking sound was heard and under the astonished gazes of the crowd, a large crack appeared on the indestructible defensive barrier. Gotcha. Gotcha. Heavens, the defensive barrier is about to shatter. Everyone retreat quickly. The defensive barrier is about to explode. It was not known which disciple took the lead to shout, but the rest of the disciples began to shout. The cracking sound continued to spread and the disciples quickly felt the heat from the moist flames. All of the disciples quickly retreated and used their yuan power to protect themselves. Their strength could not be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan. If they were to be affected by this energy, they would not be able to cultivate properly for a long time. On the high platform, when the four palace masters saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan's martial skills had actually shattered the defensive barrier, they immediately stood up. In the next moment, the four palace masters made their moves at the same time. The yuan power in their bodies spread out and replenished the energy of the defensive barrier. The martial arts stage's defensive barrier had always been very powerful. In the past competitions between the four palaces, there had been situations where it had broken. However, that was only possible during the finals. Now, it was only the third preliminary round and the defensive barrier had already shattered under the attack. It was clear to see how powerful the disciples were this time. After the four palace masters made their moves, the defensive barrier was replenished with energy and gradually closed up, filling up the shattered area. Seeing this scene, the disciples below the spectators' stage finally relaxed. However, the Yuan power ripples from before still caused them to have a lingering fear in their hearts. Too terrifying. Bailey Hongzhuang is definitely a famous person in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. For a new disciple to be able to reach this level, even in the entire Tiangang sect, there are only a few. Who said that Bailey Hongzhuang got in through the back door? If this kind of strength is obtained through the back door, then what are the others? Bailey Hongzhuang will be the goddess in my heart from now on. If anyone dares to slander her again, I will kill him. As soon as the disciple finished speaking, the group of cultivators also began to chime in one after another. Regardless of the final result of this competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had used her strength to conquer all of them. Perhaps it was because Bailey Hongzhuang was usually not calculative, but now that everyone knew the truth, they felt even more guilty towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Previously, they had really been gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Their way of dealing with a woman was really too much. After Xia Jiqing and the others saw that all the disciples had changed their views, they couldn't help but feel happy for Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2255. The four palace masters only retracted their hands when the energy fluctuations from the protective barrier gradually calmed down. Their eyes lit up. Just from the energy fluctuations, they were able to determine how powerful Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan were. After a moment, the protective barrier disappeared and the situation on the stage gradually became clear. However, the originally huge battle stage had now turned into ruins. It was full of potholes and even the surrounding flat ground had disappeared. The fences were lying on the ground in disarray, and many of them were directly blown up. Looking at the terrifying destructive power, the disciples couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This kind of destructive power was too frightening. Everyone's eyes searched through the ruins and finally found Bailey Hongzhuang and Yan Yuhuan's figures. At this moment, the two of them were standing in the ruins and the crowd couldn't even see their figures clearly. They could only see the parts above their chest. This was because the ruins had already blocked their figures. Compared to before, Yan Yuhuan and Bailey Hongzhuang's figures were undoubtedly in a more sorry state. Yan Yuhuan's face was pale and his hair was messy. His expression was filled with shock and astonishment, but most of it was disbelief. Bailey Hongzhuang's situation wasn't any better. However, her clothes were dyed red and it was impossible to see her injuries. Who won and who lost? A disciple curiously asked. At this moment, it was impossible to determine the result just by looking at the two's expressions. I'm afraid it's still Yan Yuhuan. After all, Yan Yuhuan is very experienced and powerful. I think it should be Bailey Hongzhuang. Her blood chi field is very powerful. The referee elder leaped and appeared on top of the ruins. If he didn't take a closer look, it would be difficult to determine who the winner was. Junior sister Bailey, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Today is really a surprise. Yan Yuhuan slowly said. At this moment, he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with admiration and a trace of admiration. This kind of cultivation talent was too shocking. Senior brother Yan is very powerful. I was just lucky. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Something like the blood aura field isn't something that can be obtained just by luck. I wholeheartedly accept my loss in this match. Yan Yuhuan clasped his hands towards Bailey Hongzhuang. He was truly convinced of his loss. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast had yet to make a move. This was only a competition on the martial arts stage. If it was a life and death battle, the person who would die in the end would definitely be him. Thank you for letting me win, senior brother Yan. The moment Yan Yuhuan admitted his failure, a burst of exclamations broke out from the spectator stands. Oh my god, senior brother Yan actually failed. Doesn't that mean Bailey Hongzhuang's strength is second only to the four great masters? This news is too explosive. Doesn't that mean that Bailey Hongzhuang has entered the finals? A new disciple can participate in the Battle of the Deer. This is too rare. In a split second, fiery and envious gazes landed on Bailey Hongzhuang. Regardless of whether Bailey Hongzhuang could make a name for herself in the Battle of the Deer, just the fact that she could participate in the Battle of the Deer at her age was already a kind of glory. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang wins. The referee elder's voice rang out. Chapter 2256. Master, how is your body? Xiaohei quickly asked. Don't worry, I just consumed a lot of energy. I just need to rest for a while, there is no problem. As for the injuries, they were all superficial and would recover quickly. When she was cultivating in the desert world, she was almost always injured, and now she had already gotten used to it. Under such circumstances, her body's recovery speed had also improved. Not only that, but her ability to resist attacks had also become stronger. If she had suffered such injuries in the past, the situation would have been much worse than now, but for the current Bailey Hongzhuang it was nothing. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the competition area, Gui Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu both greeted her. "Junior sister Bailey, how are your injuries?" Bailey Hongzhuang took out a healing pill and said, "I'm fine." Gui Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu looked at her carefully. They saw that although Bailey Hongzhuang's face was pale, her mental state was excellent, so they were relieved. After such a battle, Bailey Hongzhuang's breath was not weak. It could be seen how strong Bailey Hongzhuang's combat power was. Tan Lihan had left at this moment. She really didn't want to face Bailey Hongzhuang again. That would be really embarrassing. "Junior sister Bailey, tomorrow is the finals. You have consumed a lot of energy. It is better to go back and rest." Gui Jinyuan's voice was warm and full of concern. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "In that case, I will go back first. 2 senior brothers, you can do it." Gui Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu chuckled. "Junior sister, please rest assured. You have already contributed so much to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. We will do our best to fight for resources for the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall." Bailey Hongzhuang slowly left the competition area. At the same time, Yen Yuhuan had also returned to the Black Tortoise Temple to rest. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang leave, Xia Jiqing and the others also left the stands and sent Bailey Hongzhuang back. Until Bailey Hongzhuang went back, Xia Jiqing and the others continued to return to the stands to watch the next match. Now, the matches were getting more and more exciting, and the martial techniques of the cultivators were also getting more and more powerful. The more they watched, the more battle techniques they could learn, which would be of great help to them in the future. At night, Bailey Hongzhuang stopped cultivating after sensing Di Beichen's aura. At the same time, Di Beichen was already sitting beside her. "Wife, how is your body recovering?" At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's face was no longer pale. Instead, it was rosy again. During this period of time, Di Beichen had been cultivating with Bailey Hongzhuang, so he was very familiar with Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled elegantly. "I'm fine now. My wife, your performance today really surprised the palace masters." Now that he recalled the expressions of several palace masters at that time, Di Beichen still found it very funny. "I have never participated in any competition in the sect before, so it is normal for everyone to not know my strength." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled, then pulled Di Beichen's arm and asked, "Beichen, what is the result of the competition of the 4 palace halls?" From the moment the list of the finalists was decided, the ranking of the 4 palace halls was already set. However, she came back to rest first, so she didn't know the ranking. Chapter 2257. Following Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. "You mean our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is number 1? Although Di Beichen had only said, "Very good," based on Di Beichen's character, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately guessed the result. Di Beichen smiled and nodded. "That's right, there's a huge reversal in this result." Palace Master Qin's smile is almost reaching behind his ears. Bailey Hongzhuang's smile gradually widened. Although she rarely stayed in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, as a member of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she was extremely happy to see the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall achieve such a good result. Originally, the Azure Dragon Palace Hall had the best result. Who would have thought that the result would be reversed? Di Beichen chuckled. "You are the biggest variable in this." Most of the practitioners knew how strong the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were. They were also clear about the disciples who had entered the finals. However, no one had thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to enter the finals. This caused a huge reversal in the situation. There were a total of 10 disciples who had entered the finals. In total, each palace hall should have 2.5 spots. The strength of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had never been bad. This time, with the addition of Bailey Hongzhuang unexpectedly entering the finals, there was no need to say more about the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's result. How many people from the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall have entered the finals this time? Bailey Hongzhuang asked curiously. She was not very clear about Gui Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu's strength. However, she felt that they were very strong and had a high chance of entering the finals. However, if everyone had entered the finals, then the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's result would be terrifying. Shen Xiuhan Gui Jianyuan Yi Qinyu, and you. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with astonishment. The four of us have all entered the finals? Di Beichen nodded. That's right. Right now, the entire Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is flourishing. You've become the hero of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Because Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had entered the finals, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall became the first of the four palaces. In the following period of time, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's cultivation resources were the most abundant. Therefore, the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were naturally grateful to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. I didn't expect that the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples would take up half of the 10 people in the finals. What about the other 3 palaces? 3 from the Azure Dragon Palace, 2 from the White Tiger Palace. The Black Tortoise Palace is the worst. Originally, with Yan Yuhuan's strength, he should have been able to enter the finals. Who would have thought that you would appear out of nowhere and push him out? Therefore, the Black Tortoise Palace is left with only Yan Bin to enter the finals. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but be speechless after learning about the situation in the Black Tortoise Hall. It seems that the fact that she had defeated Yan Yuhuan had made things worse for the Black Tortoise Palace Hall. Originally, the Black Tortoise Palace Hall would have been able to retain at least 2 of their spots and would not have been considered shameful. But now they had lost a great deal of face. Don't think too much about it. In every competition of the 4 palaces, there will always be the first and the last place. This is very normal. It will be fine after some time. As if he had seen through Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughts, Di Beichen spoke out to console her. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. It's all good news. The finals will begin tomorrow. Because of today's competition, most of the disciples have suffered some injuries. The palace master hopes that you will have more time to rest. Therefore, they have already drawn the lots for the finals for you. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.